President Cyril Ramaphosa will deliver the key programs of the Government of National Unity later today. Civil society is calling on the new administration to prioritise the needs of the people. But what role will the non-governmental organisations play in this new term? Ziniko Mhlaba joins us now. Ziniko, good morning. We know that there have been concerns from NGOs about a lack of funding, threats to their very existence, and they do perform an incredibly important function of South African society. Just share with us some of the conversations you've been having this morning.
Good morning, Emmanuel. This morning we started by speaking to Outer about the issues relating to corruption and how, the civil society movements in South Africa can play a role when it comes to the 7th administration and also keeping it in checks when it comes to spending. We know that as far as corruption, we've been talking about, lack of funding towards the NPA and other crime-fighting agencies. However, another very important issue that South Africa has been dealing with is the issue of gender-based violence. You know that since 2018, the president has been very active in terms of gathering civil society behind one vision and strategy that will be able to eradicate issues of violence, especially towards women and children. I'm joined now by one vocal person, very active individual in that space who's been at the forefront of those initiatives. Lisa Fitton, who's joining me now. A very interesting period to in, Lisa. We are, transitioning now into a government which is made up of multiple voices coming from different ideologies. When it comes to issues of violence, do you think, you will need a new approach now that you will be dealing with various political parties in the executive? Does it make your work easier or a bit more complicated?
It's both. I think, on the one hand, you have a larger group of parties now working on the issue, having to commit themselves to it. So there could be a lot more political will. At the same time, I think you also have parties who are now part of the GNU, who have no real track record or history in this area. They know how to say the right things. Oh, it's wrong, it's terrible, it shouldn't happen, bring back the death penalty, which some people agree with, which I don't. But that's all they do know. The deeper, more technical knowledge is lacking. So there's a risk that we might have populist and fairly shallow initiatives pushed through rather than the kind of deep transformative change that we need. So that's the one possible risk, is that the initiatives become diluted, although we obviously have the opportunity of more people working together on the issues. But I think there's also the question of what happens to opposition now. Who will hold the GNU to account when so many parties are now all part of the GNU? So that's going to be an interesting challenge, is where will the opposition, the holding to account, come from? If I look at our opposition, which is now MK and the EFF, MK has no track record at all as a party, so one has no idea how they're going to be in opposition. And I think if we also look at the history of President Zuma around women, I wouldn't hold my breath around them being a particularly transformative voice.
Let's talk about your approach towards provincial executives, just away from the national executive. We know that the president has been very, very helpful or very positive in terms of your recommendations and implementing them and directing resources towards some of the issues you have raised as a civil society. At the provincial level, how are you working around these governments? And do you think you've done sufficient work in terms of engaging and holding provincial executives accountable? I'm referencing the issues of Gauteng, especially when it comes to the funding of NPOs.
Yes, I think Gauteng is interesting because it's going to remain traditional in the sense that you have your governing party and you have your opposition. It's going to be very important, I think, to work out the interplay between national GNU and provincial opposition. That's going to present particular challenges, but I think an opposition is going to be very important in terms of holding to account, especially for what has happened in relation to social development. I think, one of the things that completely lost was the impact that non-payment had on domestic violence shelters. Almost all of them were closed at one point or couldn't take in new women. This is in stark contrast to a national government that's saying this is a priority, it's a pandemic, we must do everything we can, and yet this is unfolding at provincial level. And then you also run into the provinces, the politics between province and national, with province sometimes saying, look, we're a separate sphere of government to some extent, national cannot dictate to us. And this is one of the difficulties with social development.
The importance of not blurring the line between being a civil society that's independent, that is able to hold government accountable, and actually collaborating with some of the
Yes.
positive work that the government is doing. How important is that, ensuring that the line is there, it's visible, it is not crossed?
No, it's really important, and it's a very difficult one to walk, because you don't want to damage relationships so much that you can't work together because it's necessary, but you also don't want to be co-opted. So I think it's going to be very important to be clear with government. We have a common purpose here. We have the same outcomes in mind, but there are going to be times when we disagree, and that it has to be accepted that there will be disagreements, and that disagreement is not an attempt to destabilize or crash government or criticize it. It's an attempt to say, listen to other dissenting voices and let's think together, because different ideas can actually bring you to a more creative outcome in the end. So I think it's going to be a challenging relationship, but I mean, hopefully we're at the point where people realize that civil society and government are not the same thing, even if they have the same purpose.
Thank you very much for it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's Lisa Fenton. That just give us insight in terms of how government can actually work hand in glove with the civil society sector. And of course, we know that there have been some challenges, especially when it comes to issues of school infrastructure, which is something we'll look at in the next hour or two with another civil movement that's going to talk to us about the importance of solving those issues in the education sector, especially when it comes to pit toilet, when it comes to old infrastructure that has not been, maintained in various schools, especially when it comes to rural schools here in South Africa. So, Iman, that's the latest from us. It's back to you for now.